The toy lay in pieces on the cracked pavement while Lily screamed. Small fists curled around nothing. Sarah clutched her cheek, eyes wet, her breath coming in quick, sharp gasps, as a man's shadow disappeared into the dusk. Windows stayed shut, footsteps hurried past, and the street felt suddenly much colder. Then a low roar rolled up the block. Motorcycles, leather jackets, the kind of noise that makes you look twice. Daniel pulled his helmet off, listened to the crying, and walked forward as if the world had handed him a choice. What would you do if you heard that sound? What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning after the street broke into noise, the small house on Maple Street looked ordinary again. Chipped white paint, a crooked mailbox, laundry flapping like quiet flags. Inside, Sarah moved with the soft, efficient motions of someone used to smoothing other people's mornings. She boiled tea, packed a small sandwich into a brown paper bag, and checked Lily's hair in the mirror, pinning a stray curl behind an ear. The broken toy sat on the windowsill, a small, splintered soldier with one arm missing. Sarah touched it once, and then turned away, because touching the broken things felt too much like touching the ache inside her. Who would fix what they could not see? Across town, Daniel's world smelled of petrol and leather. The clubhouse was a long garage with posters tacked to the walls and a permanent cigarette haze in the corners. Men and women leaned on bikes, laughing in low, rough voices, passing cigarette butts like offerings at a small altar. Daniel's jacket hung over a chair, a black leather jacket with a faded patch sewn inside, a tiny embroidered cross that had been stitched by his sister years ago. He always kept it where he could reach it. The jacket meant nothing to anyone who only saw patches and studs, but to Daniel it was a map, past promises, old grief, and the line he would not cross. He ran his thumb over that cross when he was thinking, what weight does a single stitch carry? Lily was 5 and world-sized in a way that made small things matter like grand events. She loved drawing with thick crayons and stacking stones into little towers in the yard. After her toy was broken, she kept making tiny forts of pillows around her, as if the walls would stop the memory from coming back. She asked her mother why the man had hit her, and Sarah answered with the kind of careful speech adults use for dangerous truths. Not everyone is kind, love. But we are safe. Lily's eyes asked more questions than her words did. Could safety be taught like a song, learned in a single breath? Sarah worked at a bakery 2 blocks from their house. She knew the names of every regular, the exact tilt of old Mr. Graham's hat, and the hour Mrs. Ortega always ordered the same lemon tart. At the bakery, she could make something warmth-scented and perfect, kneading dough like a hand finding its way through grief. The customers praised the pastries and never asked where the small bruise on her cheek had come from. People praised things they rarely asked. When she swept at closing, she would sometimes press her forehead against glass until the fog of breath blurred the streetlights. There, in the quiet, she let herself worry about the future. Rent that might go unpaid, Lily's small cough last winter, the look in Lily's eyes the night before. The list of small failures felt like a ledger that might demand payment at any moment. Daniel's sister, Anna, worked at a clinic and kept an old photograph of the 2 of them on her desk. 2 kids on a summer day, hair full of wind, grins stubborn and wide. She was the one who tied the cross into the jacket years ago when Daniel could not, when he was younger and rougher and more certain of nothing. Anna worried about him the way a sister does. Protective, impatient, convinced she knew the one right way to pull someone back from danger. She called him on Sundays, and he often ignored the call until he needed to hear a voice reminding him he was loved. Did love ever sound like a phone you could put down and pick up later? At the clubhouse that afternoon, Daniel fixed a flat tire while people talked around him about a charity ride next month and a new recruit who could not keep his temper. Daniel's hands moved the way hands trained in both tenderness and force move. Sure, quick, careful not to cut themselves on the small sharp things. He listened to the stories, but kept his own short. He did not tell them about the boy on Maple Street who had cracked someone else's toy. He did not tell them about Lily's crying or Sarah's tired smile. Inside him, small impossible things clinked like coins. The image of a tiny hand holding nothing. The sound of a woman stifling a sob. He could ride fast to drown those sounds, or he could stop and listen. Which answer fits a man who said he would protect? Even in their small, ordinary worlds, things threaded together. Anna would bring a care package to Sarah sometimes, leaving a loaf and a note with no name. Daniel would ride past the bakery and slow, catching sight of the child's fort of pillows through the window. These were little overlaps, like two lines in a drawing that almost meet. They did not know yet how tightly those lines would be pulled. Each morning returned like a promise that could be kept or broken, and each small kindness stacked like stones that might become a bridge, or a cairn to mourn with. What happens when the bridge is needed and the stones have not been placed? At night, Lily slept with one good toy left, a small cloth rabbit with ears that dog-eared from love. She pressed it to her face and whispered secrets into its stitched mouth. In another room, Sarah sat with a bill and a flashlight, the numbers making a quiet, hard language. Outside, the streetlight hummed, and a bike engine idled far off. Daniel rolled the jacket over his arms, feeling the weight of the patch and the softness beneath. He could not know then how a broken toy would become a small sign that would change a whole neighborhood. He could not know that some sounds, once heard, refused to be ignored. The first small alarm came as a note stuck beneath Sarah's door one morning. It was a scrap of paper, edges torn, with a hurried scrawl. "Keep your mouth shut. We watch." No name, no signature, only the black ink that looked too deliberate for a child's scribble. Sarah folded the paper into the palm of her hand as if heat might dissolve it. She did not tell Lily. How do you explain danger to a 5-year-old without breaking something else? That same week, Mr. Graham from the bakery mentioned, casually, that a new family had moved into a house 3 doors down. They keep to themselves, he said, voice low, and then changed the subject by offering an extra scone as if sweetness could erase the note. Anna, who sometimes left packages without fanfare, found her car scratched on a night she had stayed late at the clinic. The line of damage looked almost like a message, but she could not be sure. Scratches could be a coincidence. Or not. Which one feels worse to live with? Daniel rode past Maple Street and slowed when he saw a man with a heavy jacket watching the playground. The man's jaw was set the wrong way, a permanent line that made his face look old. Daniel felt the heat rise behind his ribs, an old reflex that always answered a threat with speed. He could have turned the bike and gone on. He could have parked and spoken. He did neither that day. He watched instead, hidden by the hum of his engine, and the man flicked a cigarette and walked off as if nothing had happened. The watching left a taste in Daniel's mouth like metal. What does a look become when someone keeps giving it? At the bakery, a regular asked Sarah where she had been the night before, and she lied. The lie landed on the air like something fragile and made her chest ache. People around them continued with their small urgencies, coffee to be brewed, bread to be sliced, while something larger circled like a bird above the town. Lily asked once why strangers sometimes looked mean, and Sarah held her close and whispered, "Some people are scared inside. That scares them into being cruel." It was not the whole truth, but it was a truth that could fit into a child's hands. Could a small sentence hold off the cold for a night? Anna started to worry in a way that made her leave work late and drive slowly past Daniel's clubhouse. She wanted to see him, to say things that had not yet been said, that she feared for him, that she remembered him as a boy with scraped knees who would not back down from a dare, that she wanted him to be the man who made better choices. When she finally stopped and walked into the garage, she watched the people there like a doctor scanning a chart. They were careless with their laughter, but careful with their edges. She saw Daniel at the bench, fixing a chain, and she watched him rub his thumb over the cross stitched into the jacket. Sometimes the smallest gestures were the loudest messages. What would you do if the person you loved kept choosing danger? Rumors began to thread through the town like smoke. A pickup truck was seen turning too slowly by the school, a phone call from an unknown number that went silent, a youth at the corner who had been pushing other children off bikes. Nobody tied the incidents together yet, but the pattern started to look less like coincidence. Sarah found herself checking the locks twice and listening for footsteps at odd hours. Daniel caught himself tracing routes to the bakery, thinking he might ride by at noon accidentally. He told himself it was because he liked the cinnamon rolls. That was partly true, and partly the way a man hides a plan inside a harmless sentence. In the evenings, the small group at the clubhouse debated what to do. Some wanted to ignore it. Problems came and went, they said, and a club could not become everyone's answer. Others, including Daniel, felt a pull that was moral and personal both. The town's fear had a name now, and someone needed to answer. A newcomer named Marcus spoke loudest about lines that should not be crossed. Marcus had a smile that fell flat when the conversation turned serious, and his words were sharp like a blade tucked in a sleeve. He volunteered to patrol. Daniel liked the idea of watching with friends who had his back. He liked the sound of numbers and the comfort of a plan. But plans can be maps to places you did not mean to go. Where does one man's courage become another man's recklessness? At home, Sarah could feel the city changing its tone. The neighbors spoke quieter, and the news anchor on TV kept talking about rising petty crime. Anna left a note in Sarah's mailbox one morning. If you need anything, call me. No number. A cousinly shorthand that meant, I am here. Sarah pressed the thin paper to her chest and thought of how thin the town's safety felt, how easily it might tear. Lily fingered the torn soldier's arm and asked, will the man come back? The question landed like a stone in a pond. The ripples had begun. Who throws the next pebble? The day the town stopped pretending nothing was happening began with the ordinary clatter of the bakery. Dough slapped on wood, the bell over the door jingling, morning customers chasing warm coffee. Sarah smiled through the motions, handed over change, and tucked Lily's little cloth rabbit into her bag. She had just turned to take a box of tarts when a car door slammed outside, loud and sudden like a shout. A boy from down the block, one of the ones who'd been pushing children off bikes, was there with two older men, faces hard and eyes tired the way people get when they decide they can take what they want. He grabbed the paper bag with Lily's snacks and, without asking, ripped it open. You kids always got something, he sneered, and when Sarah stepped forward to reclaim it, he shoved her so hard she hit the counter. A tray of pastries slid and crashed to the floor. Would anyone move? Silence fell for a breath. Customers stared, hands frozen over cups. The boy laughed and kicked the broken toy soldier from the windowsill into the street. Lily, who had followed for a biscuit, ran in and tried to pick it up. The man caught her small wrist in a grip that made her face go white and then let go with a slap across Sarah's cheek, right where a faint bruise already rested. The sound of skin on skin seemed to make people step back, as if the noise might spread. Sarah stood there, her cheek flaming, her first instinct to cover Lily and whisper that everything was okay, even though everything was not. What do you do when the world turns loud and you are small inside it? Outside, Daniel was 5 blocks away, turning into a side street on his way back from errands. He heard the crash of glass and the sharp little cry that could only be Lily's. The sound pulled like gravity. He let the bike idle a moment too long at the curb, thumb still on the throttle. He could keep riding, stay safe, stay out of trouble. He could also walk into a room full of quiet faces and angry men and make something happen that could not be reversed. If you were in his place, would you walk away or fight back? Tell me what you'd do. The choice tightened in his throat like an old knot. He killed the engine and ran. The roar faded and he moved faster with each step, the jacket slapping his back, the cross inside tickling like a prayer. Inside the bakery, the boy shoved a chair against the wall, as if to make space for his own size. Mr. Graham tried to step between them and got a shove that sent him into the display case. Anna, who had been in line, reached out but froze when the boy looked at her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. She could see Daniel coming through the doorway, and something in her face said both hope and dread. Daniel felt every person's breath like a measurement. How scared, how willing, how much they would let him carry. Could one man carry what so many were afraid to name? Daniel chose to speak first. He did not shout. His voice was low and steady like a hammer before it fell. "Leave her," he said. The men laughed at the calmness, as if it were something foolish or staged. The boy shoved Daniel, hard enough to stagger him, and the room breathed in and out as if waiting for a storm. Daniel's hands went to the cross on his jacket, then to the boy's shoulder. He had promised himself years ago he would not be the kind of man who answered hurt with more hurt, but promises live in daylight, and this moment had no time for daylight. He could leave with a bruise or stay and make sure it never happened again. Which choice respects a promise? That shove broke the little balance. Daniel grabbed the boy's wrist and twisted him away from Lily. It happened fast. The boy's friends reached, fists and words, and the small bakery turned into a place with edges. Chairs scraped, someone screamed, and Mr. Graham tried to pull a broom between men and men. Daniel felt fury like a second heartbeat, hot, uncompromising, and beneath it a colder thought. What would this do to Sarah, to Lily, to Anna, to the bakery? He could see the future fork like two roads, one where things got louder and darker, and one where his stand might force others to stand too. Would courage make them safer or mark them for more danger? When the scuffle settled, because it did briefly, two of the men stumbled away with bruised faces and angry mouths. The boy, however, did not leave. He spat on the sidewalk and promised in that small, ugly voice that they would see them again. He left the threat like a stone thrown in water. The ripples were already moving toward the edges of town. People helped pick up shattered pastries and sat in stunned silence as Sarah gathered Lily close. Daniel stood with his hand on the counter, the warmth of bread and the cold of his choice mixing together. He had acted, and now the town had noticed. How many doors had he opened by answering one punch? The first wave after the bakery fight was a shock that made everyone go quiet, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Sarah sat on the stoop with Lily asleep against her shoulder, the small cloth rabbit limp in her hand. Her cheek throbbed where the boy had struck her, and a dull anger coiled beneath the hot shame. She thought of the note tucked under her door, of Anna's scratched car, of the way neighbors now glanced away. She could stay down and pay the bills, hide the bruise, and teach Lily that the world was mostly gentle. Or she could stand and let someone else decide what safety meant for them, which felt more like surviving, and which felt like living. Daniel did not wait for others to decide. He spent the night drafting a plan that sat between instinct and reason, a visible presence, steady and calm, that would tell the troublemakers the neighborhood watched them. It began simple. Ride by in pairs at midday, stop outside the school, speak to the kids, make sure they were seen. He would ask the club to ride slowly and be polite, to show faces rather than fists. He also wanted to document things, names, dates, broken toys, threats. Evidence, he told himself, could be more useful than bravado. Was proof the same as hope? Anna came to the bakery the next morning with two things, a thermos of coffee and a list of numbers. She worked at the clinic and had a patient who did pro bono legal advising once a week. She made a call, explained the sketch of events, and got someone willing to meet. "You don't have to be a hero alone," she said to Sarah, but her voice betrayed how badly she wanted Daniel to make the safe choice. Anna's hands fidgeted at the edge of the counter, showing how a helper can be a trembling thing. Who carries the courage for others when they have so little of their own? Marcus, whose voice in the clubhouse had pushed for patrols, showed up with a different energy, sharp, eager, like a spark that smells of smoke. He outlined routes, times, and roles with quick gestures, each suggestion folded into the plan like extra weight. "We'll be clear, no violence, just presence," he said, smiling in a way that did not soften the edges. He volunteered to lead the first patrol. People nodded, because plans felt like answers. Daniel listened and added small rules. Radio contact, no one goes alone, report everything. The club agreed. For a moment, the solution felt tidy, neat as a stack of oven-warm buns. But Daniel carried a private worry that neatness could hide complexity. Can a map predict every cliff? Mr. Graham, still dusting flour from his sleeves, offered the bakery as a meeting place for the neighborhood. He would keep a notepad behind the counter and write down names or strange events people reported. He was older now, and his hands shook when he poured coffee, but the set of his jaw said he had seen enough to know when to act. The bakery made sense as a hub. It was a place people trusted for small things, and trust can be the scaffolding for larger plans. But trust also makes a target obvious. Who chooses a roof when the storm looks likely? They began the watch a week later. Pairs of riders rolled slowly past schools and playgrounds, helmets off, faces visible. Daniel rode with a quiet grip on the handlebars, his jacket heavy and familiar, the cross stitched under his collar like a small, private sentence he could read in times of doubt. Kids waved as they passed. Some parents came out to the sidewalk and said thank you, their relief plain on faces that had been tight for too long. Sarah watched from the bakery window and felt a lift she had not expected, like a hand on a shoulder in a long night. For a few hours, the town seemed to hold to the map they had drawn. Was safety just the sound of people showing up? The small victory gave everyone breath, but the darker thread had already been sewing itself into the fabric. The boy who had hit Sarah watched from behind the corner store, his eyes calculating. Marcus suggested widening patrols to include the rougher parts of town where the boy's friends hung out. Daniel agreed, trusting Marcus's local knowledge. They planned a night ride. Visible lights, 2x2, showing strength where strength might be needed. Anna wrote it down, her pen scratching like a metronome. Daniel folded the paper and put it in his jacket. The plan smelled right, felt right, and yet a part of him tasted metal. An old fear that a push could become a shove, and a shove could become something worse. Before the ride, Sarah found another note under her door. This one read, in the same blunt script, "Stay out of what you can't handle." The paper slid from her fingers and curled on the floor like a small animal beaten into silence. She pressed Lily closer and wondered for a moment whether their choices had made danger sharper. She would help the neighborhood, she decided, but she also promised herself to keep an eye on the fine line between protection and provocation. The plan was born of courage and need, yes, but what if courage wore the shape of a challenge someone could not resist? The next steps felt like stepping toward a path whose end she could not yet see. For a few days the town breathed easier. Children returned to the playground with sticky hands and louder laughter. The riders moved in pairs at noon and dusk, helmets off, talking to parents, nudging kids onto bikes, showing faces instead of fists. Sarah watched from behind the counter while Anna wiped tables and smiled at a child who kept coming back for another eclair. The small, steady presence made a difference you could almost taste, like salt on bread. People began to leave small notes of thanks on the bakery counter, tucked between receipts and flour-dusted napkins. Could a handful of people really change the way a place felt? That success brought a short, bright confidence. Daniel rode with a lighter step, nodding to familiar houses, stopping to tie a shoelace, or lean in to warn a cyclist about a loose strap. Kids who once flinched when a bike passed now waved, and Daniel found himself waving back until his hand ached. The patch on his jacket caught light, and the cross under the collar felt like a small promise kept. In the clubhouse, members told stories about the difference they had made. They felt useful again. Usefulness can be addictive. What happens when the need for being needed grows louder than the need to be careful? Marcus pushed for more. We've stopped them from being bold in daylight, he said, fingers tapping a table, eyes sharp. Now, we show we can be anywhere. He suggested night patrols that would sweep through territories where trouble brewed. Empty lots, alleys, the places older kids claimed late at night. Daniel hesitated. The daylight runs felt right because they put the riders on the same side as the town. Night rides felt like hunting. Anna watched him and saw the old worry stitch across his face. She tried to speak it lightly, but the worry was a weight that made her voice thin. Can good intentions survive when you change the time you act? They tried a soft step into the night. The first night ride was careful. Lights on low, voices kept conversational. No confronting unless necessary. For a while it worked. A makeshift fire was put out in an alley before anyone called the police. A couple of teens with spray paint were escorted home and apologized to the families they had frightened. The riders returned with a hum of pride. But pride can blind. That very night, someone smashed the bakery's back window with a rock big enough to leave a crater in the wood. The crash echoed through Sarah the way old grief does, loud and familiar. She found the rock on her doorstep, wrapped in a torn piece of cloth, and a new note tucked under the lip of the mat. Hands off. Who decided the line between warning and war? Rumors bloomed. Some said the boys' friends had grown bolder because the riders had shown up in the wrong places at the wrong times. Others whispered that someone else was egging the trouble on, someone who wanted chaos, so they could look like the one with the only answer. Daniel began to find small things out of place. A helmet knocked from a peg at the clubhouse. A radio left open to static when it should have been switched off. These could have been careless mistakes. They could also be signs. Which truth would you rather live with? Anna's B-plot threaded through all of it quietly. She treated a teenager at the clinic who'd been in and out of trouble. Clean record on paper, but a file of small hurts in his eyes. She talked to him like a person who refused to be only a label, offered him information about a job program, and left her card. Later she found a note on the clinic desk saying someone had been looking for that boy near the corner store. The boy's name was familiar. He was the cousin of a man who had been friendly at the clubhouse, and Anna's heart sank. Helping one life can pull you into many others. How much can one person hold? Tension began to thicken. One afternoon, a neighbor complained that a man in a club jacket had shouted at his teenage son in front of school. The school called the police to ask questions. Social media, which had been mostly quiet, filled with a clip from a shaky phone. Someone had filmed the riders the night before and posted a 2-second cut that made it seem worse than it was. The clip spread and opinions followed. Suddenly, the riders were not only protectors, but also targets. The bigger shadow had arrived. The idea that their actions could be framed and turned back on the town itself. Who picks the angle that becomes the whole story? Daniel slept badly in the days that followed. He could feel the change in the air, a new kind of watchfulness that wasn't his own. The small win had become a smell that something else was growing in the dark. He rubbed the cross under the collar, as if it could steady the tremor. Outside, someone scrawled a mark on the bakery's outer wall, a rude symbol that meant very little to some and everything to others. Marcus said nothing when Daniel brought it up, and his silence made Daniel notice the way Marcus's jaw clenched when the word responsibility came up. The line between being a guardian and being bait is thin. Who would cut it first? They thought they had a map. Then the map folded into a handful of paper and proved not to be a map at all. It began with a call that sounded too small to carry a secret. Anna had asked one of her patients, young Jamal, the teen she'd been trying to help, to come by the clinic after hours for a chat. He arrived pale and fidgety, sleeves pulled low over a fresh bruise. Anna offered tea and a silence soft enough to let him trust it. He sat, looked at the floor, and with the slow courage that comes from being pressed into a corner, he said the thing that made her hands go cold. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. The words were small, but they landed like a weight. What do you do when a confession sounds like a confession and a cry for help? Jamal told a story that did not match the simple pattern they'd believed. He had not planned the bakery thefts. He had been told to do them. A man with a van, he said, drove up and left an envelope of cash on his porch the first time. The man said no one would get hurt if Jamal did as instructed. When Jamal said he would not, his little sister came home with a mark on her arm and a neighbor's warning that she had been followed. Fear, he said, makes you a different person. He held out his phone and showed messages, photos of his sister, short demands, a number he did not recognize. Then, with a shake in his voice, he showed one message that made Anna's tea go cold. A photo of the bakery the night before and a short line beneath it. "We'll make them bleed if you don't," followed by a picture of Marcus's hand, the edge of a jacket with the club's patch just visible. Anna's eyes went to the patch and back to Jamal. Could one picture change everything you thought was true? Anna did not jump to conclusions. She was a doctor by training and a sister by habit. She kept her face steady and said the kind of things people say to steady others. "We will get you help. You are not alone." But inside, 1,000 small gears began to grind. She called Daniel with a voice that tried to be level and failed. He arrived in 10 minutes, breathless, jacket zipped halfway, the cross under his collar pressed against his throat like a question. Jamal met him with folded hands and a look that begged to be believed. Daniel crouched to be level with the boy and asked the single thing that needed asking. "Who gave you the pictures?" Jamal said the name he had been terrified to say, Marcus. The word hit the room like a fist thrown at a glass. Marcus, the steady volunteer, the one who had pushed for wider patrols and seemed to carry the town's worries in neat lists. Marcus, who had smiled in meetings and given the kind of orders people accepted without thinking. Daniel felt the ground tilt. How do you handle the idea that someone who stood beside you might also stand behind your enemies? They could have taken Jamal to the police then, but Jamal's fear was a shadow that swallowed good ideas. He could not be sure if the photo was a plant, if someone had staged it to ruin Marcus, or if it was the bitter truth. Anna's clinic had a security camera that caught people entering the front door after hours. They watched the footage together in a small, cramped room. The grainy seconds stretched out like a slow confession. The camera showed Jamal meeting a man by the van, the exchange of money, the man's hand hovering near the jacket patch, as if to show it off. The face was not clear enough to be a legal proof, but the shape of the movement matched the line of Marcus's shoulders the way a silhouette matches a person at dusk. Daniel left the clinic with his stomach hollow. He had ridden beside Marcus on patrols, laughed with him over coffee, and trusted the calmness in his voice. Now suspicion was a new, sharp thing in him, carving lines he could not ignore. He thought of promises he'd made, silent ones to himself about who he would be in a fight, and felt them drift. If Marcus was involved, what had they been part of without knowing? If Marcus had been baiting trouble, who else had he told to step forward? Every friendly nod felt suddenly hunger-motivated. Can you separate the man who stood beside you from the choices he made when no one watched? Word did not stay quiet for long. Rumors, greedy and fast, began to bloom like mold. Someone saw Marcus leaving the corner store the night the bakery window broke. Someone else said they had seen him arguing with a man who fit the description Jamal gave. The club met in a hush that felt like a waiting room. Faces closed, shoulders tight. Marcus walked in like nothing had changed, voice smooth, offering plans and routes, as if those lists could cover what Jamal had shown on his phone. Daniel watched him and felt the betrayal as a late, heavy tide. He wanted to believe Marcus was being set up. He also wanted to believe Jamal's fear had a cause, and that cause was not just bad luck. The first major twist of the town's tiny war did what twists do. It split the road. Some people insisted Marcus was innocent and that Jamal was lying to avoid trouble. Others said the possibility that someone inside the riders could be feeding the trouble meant everything had to be rechecked. Sarah, listening from behind the bakery counter, felt a new cold wind. Her hope that riders could simply show up and fix the problem seemed suddenly naive. A rut had been found under the bark. The idea that the boy they blamed might be a victim forced them to ask a harsher question. Who profits when a neighborhood grows afraid? By the time the sun slid down, the town had two new truths: Jamal's fear and the photograph. Both were plain, and both were dangerous. Daniel sat on the bakery steps and watched people move like cautious pieces on a board. He pressed a thumb to the cross stitched inside his jacket and felt the thread like a small, stubborn line. They had chosen to act, but action without truth can cut the wrong throat. The map they had trusted had been redrawn without their knowledge. Who held the new pen? They needed a moment to breathe, and for a few days they found one in small, honest hours. Daniel went to the bakery at dusk and bought a single tart, because Mr. Graham would always argue about the price until Daniel laughed and said it was on him. They sat on the stoop while the street cooled, and Daniel listened as people walked by and thanked the riders. It felt like repair work, gentle as stitching. He told Mr. Graham about Jamal's phone and the photo, and the old man shook his head with a slow look of someone who has seen too many fights. "You do the right thing, son," Mr. Graham said, voice cracked but firm. "Sometimes the right thing is the only thing left." The words settled in Daniel like a coin in his palm. What does the right thing cost? That night Marcus came by, not in a hurry, but with a careful step, and sat close enough to reach across the bench. He spoke quietly about how he wished the town would be kinder, without needing riders at all. He volunteered to help with the legal meeting Anna had arranged, to stand there and say what had happened, publicly, openly. There was an earnestness in him that made people relax. He knew how to sound like the steady center of something. When Daniel asked him directly if he had ever been near the bakery the night the window broke, Marcus's jaw tightened. But he answered with a small, honest story about a past mistake, a cousin who had been into trouble, a time he had turned away instead of stepping in, and the regret that still tasted like ash. He said he had joined the riders because he wanted to fix that pattern, not repeat it. The confession made him more solid, not less. Can a past mistake become proof of future loyalty? Anna spent more quiet hours with Jamal. She brought him a packet of tea and a printout of job listings, and she listened while he described the fear that pushed him into bad choices. She told him, in a voice that kept steady even when it trembled, that she once blamed herself for letting Daniel fall into rough company when they were children. The memory was raw. Daniel as a small boy with scraped knees, Anna promising she would protect him, and failing in ways that left a thin line of guilt. Hearing her make that admission opened something in Jamal. He trusted someone who had known failure and still kept trying. Anna's vulnerability was a quiet power. She did not pretend to be unbreakable, and that made others believe her. Who heals when the healer admits her own hurt? Sarah, too, let a small guard drop. She invited Anna in for coffee, and, standing in the warm kitchen while Lily slept in the next room, described how terrible it felt to be both brave and ashamed at once. She admitted she had hidden bruises and lied to customers because pride and fear are close cousins. Daniel overheard part of the conversation and felt his chest twist with something between anger and tenderness. He told Sarah, clumsy in his softness, that Lily had drawn him a picture of a big bike with a tiny house beside it and had written "Thank you" in the corner. The picture was crooked, and so perfect he kept it folded in his wallet like a promise. Small moments like that made him feel human in a way the rides could not. What holds a person when everything else feels like it might fall? There were late nights when the club sat in a circle and spoke in voices that softened as they admitted fears. Marcus told a story about a brother he had lost to an older, rougher life, how he had promised to be the kind of man who changed things, and how that promise hurt him in quiet hours. Daniel read that as honesty and felt his suspicion ebb a little. Anna watched Marcus with an expression that mixed relief and caution. She wanted to believe, but had learned to let proof not feeling, guide the next steps. The group made small vows to keep records, to be transparent with police, to protect without escalating. For a while, the plan resembled something pure. Can people rebuild trust by speaking the truth out loud? Even Jamal showed a new edge of hope. He brought Anna a list of names, small details, like who had been picked up by the van, and trembled as she wrote them down. Trust was like a muscle in him now. It had atrophied, but with gentle exercise it blinked awake. These quieter scenes tied people together in ways that felt real. Shared confessions, small gifts, the kind of steady presence that acts like mortar between bricks. But beneath those comforts was a thin, persistent worry. Had they woven a net or made a target? The more they reached toward each other, the more someone might feel the need to cut the rope. Who watches the watchers when trust becomes power? That last question sat in Daniel's bones as he walked home with a picture from Lily folded in his jacket. He wanted to believe Marcus. He wanted to believe that Jamal's fear had a clear face and that the riders could be the steady solution. Love and loyalty pulled him one way, doubt the other. The town was trying to stitch itself back together with human hands, and human hands can both save and smudge. By morning, Daniel would have to choose which thread to follow, and the choice would not only mark him, it might mark everyone who trusted him. The blow came not as a shout, but as a slow, spreading stain. It started with a message thread someone had leaked to the wrong person, a list of patrol times, who lived where, and small notes, Sarah's bakery hours, Anna's clinic shifts, Daniel's habit of riding past the park at noon. The leak smelled wrong, because it matched details only a few people knew. Then a video appeared on the town's feed, a shaky clip of a scuffle outside the bakery, edited to make Daniel's arm look like a strike rather than a pull. The caption called them vigilantes, the comments filled with anger, and a local reporter rang the bakery phone before anyone could think. Within hours the police were asking questions, neighbors were whispering, and a live stream was already gathering viewers. How quickly can trust be hollowed out when someone shapes the story? Daniel's first thought was to find Marcus and demand answers. He went to the clubhouse and found chairs empty and radio silent. When Marcus walked in, he wore the same calm face he'd always used, only this time the calm was too practiced. Daniel asked him, voice short, where the leak had come from. Marcus smiled and pointed at the inevitable scapegoat, one of the younger riders, a new recruit with nervous hands. "We need someone to take responsibility," Marcus said, and his words were like ice. Daniel felt something cold slide down his spine. He could see what Marcus was doing, directing the heat away from himself and onto someone with no roots to fight back. Was that a leader's move or a coward's trick? Then Jamal's family was threatened. The van returned to a neighbor's driveway in the night, a silhouette moving under a streetlight, and someone left a shredded toy on the porch as a warning. Anna hurried to the house and found Jamal's mother shaking, her eyes full of a terror that swallowed words. Jamal said they had been forced to lie about who gave them the photos. He had confessed because he wanted protection, but the people who pressured him had shown him what breaking trust looked like. They had shown him Marcus's jacket patch in a staged photograph and told him what to say. The confession now sounded like both truth and a plea. Daniel's stomach lurched. How do you save someone when saving them makes the danger louder? The club split like a taut rope cutting wood. Some members rallied around Daniel, certain the clip had been doctored and furious that one of their own might be ruining lives. Others folded toward the momentum of public opinion. Fear can look like reason when a camera can point. Marcus used the chaos like a lever, calling a town meeting, framing the rider's presence as an escalator to violence rather than a shield. He positioned himself where the spotlight landed and spoke of responsibility and cleaning house in a voice that suggested painful but necessary sacrifices. Daniel watched friends he'd eaten with, laughed with, and trusted for years listen and nod. Betrayal tasted like iron on his tongue. The worst cut was private. Daniel found, wrapped in an old rag and tucked into his jacket pocket, a receipt from a diner across town. The time matched the night a certain man had been seen near the bakery. The receipt was Marcus's, or at least paid for on a card linked to him. When Daniel pointed this out to Marcus, the other man's face shifted, not in guilt, but in that practiced recalibration of a politician faced with inconvenient facts. Marcus's answer was a slow, theatrical shrug. "You think I'd set us up? Think what you want." Behind the words came the chill of a man who could let suspicion do his work for him. Daniel felt the room tilt. Every handshake, every shared laugh in the past months became a ledger of things that might not have been true. Sarah bore the public shame in her own small, private ways. Customers who had once smiled across the counter now averted their eyes or asked for pastry to go. A parent had filmed Lily crying outside the bakery and posted it with a vicious caption, and the clip roared through feeds faster than anyone could delete it. Lily clung to the cloth rabbit and asked, with the bright honesty of children, if they had done something wrong. Sarah held her tight and answered with a voice breaking like thin glass, "We try to be brave. Sometimes bravery is messy." The heart of the family felt bruised, and their small world shrank to the size of a kitchen table. By the time the town meeting dissolved into scattered, agitated groups, Daniel sat alone on the bakery's back step and let the weight of betrayal land. His chest felt raw, like a split surface healing the wrong way. He had thought he was building safety with others. Now he wondered if he had been building a stage where someone else could perform control. Anna sat beside him without a word and reached for his hand. Her fingers were steady and warm, a reminder that not every tie had been cut. But the damage had a sound, the quiet of people who no longer trusted their neighbors, the hush of doors that stayed closed. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you once called a friend? Tell me how you felt. The collapse left a clear echo. Plans laid with good intent can be weaponized, and a single person with a careful plan can steer a whole town into chaos. That night, Daniel unfastened his jacket and unfolded Lily's crooked drawing, tracing the small bike with a finger as if searching for the line where things had broken. The next move would have to be careful and hard. He had lost more than a reputation. He had lost a map he almost trusted, and now he needed to redraw it from the ashes. Daniel's rock bottom was not loud. It came in the small hours when the town was aslow, held breath, and his mind replayed every face that had shifted away. He sat on the edge of his bed with Lily's crooked drawing in his hands, the crayon lines soft from being folded. Outside the window, a single bike idled briefly, then moved on like nothing had been broken. The sting of betrayal cut into him in a way that bruises differently. It made him doubt the shape of his own judgment. He had wanted to be the kind of man who acted. Now the cost of action lay spread out in pixels and accusations. What if every good intention he followed forward only sharpened someone's aim? He thought of Anna's voice that afternoon, how she had not jumped to conclusions, how her patience had steadied Jamal enough to tell the truth. He thought of Mr. Graham dusting flour from his hands and saying, "Do the right thing." Those words were comforts and challenges at once. Daniel had always believed courage meant stepping into the fight. But courage without care could become a spear hurled without aim. He felt small beside that realization, like a rider who had finally looked down and seen the cliff edge he'd been circling. Could he learn to be brave in a way that kept others safe rather than putting them in harm's way? Anna found him at dawn on the bakery stoop, coffee steaming in both their hands though neither drank much. She sat without fuss and said something quiet about being tired of watching good people be turned into villains by quicker tongues. She admitted, voice raw, that she had once hoped to save Daniel by making the right choices for him, and that hope had sometimes kept her from saying the harder things when they mattered. Her vulnerability, honest, small, opened a space where Daniel could admit his guilt. He had let pride thread through his decisions, and pride had blinded him. The admission felt like a small thing, but small things can change the direction of a road. Who else would you choose to tell your truth to? Daniel let the confession come out like a held breath. He told Anna about the receipt he'd found and the way Marcus had deflected when pressed. He told her how he had used the club's presence like a shield without thinking whether the shield made them targets. Anna listened in the way she treated patients, careful, cataloging, thinking of next steps. When he finished, she reached into her bag and handed him a list, names she'd taken from Jamal, dates she had confirmed, small observations that could be checked. "We can do this smarter," she said. "We don't confront the heat. We gather proof, protect people, and let truth do the work." The plan felt calmer than fury, and for the first time since the leak, Daniel felt the rawness inside him shift into something steadier. How do you turn anger into a tool that doesn't slice those you love? That morning he visited Mr. Graham, who pressed a small plate of leftover pastries into his hands and said, without judgment, "You're not a saint, son. You never were. But you can be a man who learns." Mr. Graham offered the bakery as a softer front, an innocent hub where people could leave information without being pointed at. He promised to keep the ledger private and to watch for anyone who came nosing around with cruel intent. The old man's steady faith in quiet things became a kind of armor Daniel could wear. Could small domestic acts be a better fortress than loud ones? They built the new plan with the deliberate slowness of people who have learned the cost of haste. Anna called a lawyer she trusted and arranged for Jamal and his family to meet with someone who could offer legal protection and a way to turn the messages into evidence without exposing them to more danger. Daniel and two writers, trusted ones with long ties to the community, began to quietly document everything: times, faces, receipts, and the small nothings that later become pillars for a case. They stopped public patrols that week and replaced them with quiet check-ins and visible, daytime volunteer work at the school that left no room for stage photos. The choice felt like stepping out of a dark into a room with windows. Would patience be their most effective weapon? The inner shift in Daniel was subtle, but deep. He traded the immediate rush of confrontation for something that required steadiness and restraint. He slept more, or at least his sleep returned to the territory of real rest, rather than the thin, anxious watch he'd kept before. He allowed himself to be held by Anna's calm and Mr. Graham's ordinary faith. Lily's picture stayed in his wallet like a small compass, reminding him that the right path might be the one that kept her safe even if it did not make the best story for an empty room full of applause. He wondered how many men had let their egos guide choices, and then wondered why the world had sharpened against them. Can a man rebuild his honor by choosing caution over pride? By the end of the week, they had something fragile but practical. Jamal's family in a safer place for a few nights, a stack of dated notes in Mr. Graham's drawer, and a short list of witnesses Anna trusted enough to call. Marcus watched from a distance, with a face unreadable as a wall. Daniel felt the old ache of betrayal still throb, but it sat in the back of his line of sight now, useful fuel rather than blinding flame. He had shifted from being the man who reacted to being the man who prepared. It was less dramatic. It was more likely to save lives. As he folded Lily's drawing and slid it back into his wallet, he asked himself quietly, what would you do now if you had everything to lose and few people to trust? They moved like people who had learned to measure their breath before acting. Daniel gathered the small group in the back room of the bakery at dusk. Anna with her quiet lists, Mr. Graham with a legal pad, Jamal pale but steady, and two writers Daniel trusted more than any headline, Eric, the nervous new recruit who'd been blamed, and Maria, a woman from the clubhouse who mostly kept to the edges but had watched things closely. They spoke in low tones, the hum of the ovens a steady comfort, and each person folded their fear into a tool: notes, times, photographs, names. The goal was simple on paper and dangerous in practice. Catch the people who were turning fear into power, protect Jamal's family, and do it before the town festival the next morning when the square would be crowded and someone might try to make a spectacle. How do you plan for a day meant to celebrate if someone intends to turn it into a trap? Anna handed Daniel a folder. Inside were the confirmations she had pieced together. Dates of threats, messages Jamal's family had received, and a short list of suspicious transactions tied to a card that matched Marcus's diner receipt. She had also spoken to a woman at the shelter who remembered a van with a particular scrape on the side, the same scrape Jamal described. The web was small but solid. Their plan was to move quietly, not to storm in with torches. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest that was not only fear. It was the clear ring of purpose. If they failed, Jamal's family might be exposed, Sarah's bakery could be finished, and the writers might be rounded up as vigilantes. Those were real losses, not just bruised pride. What would you protect if everything you loved could be taken overnight? Eric surprised them all. He had been the scapegoat, the nervous writer handed the blame when the leak first surfaced. He volunteered to wear a wire during the festival and mingle near the square, pretending to be part of the noise while listening. He wanted to clear his name. "I'm tired of being at the fault line," he said, jaws set. His hands shook, but his voice did not. Anna made him sign a small note promising he could step back if it became dangerous. The unexpected help was the kind that makes you look twice, someone you counted out suddenly standing up with more courage than you expected. Can redemption be as quiet as a taped confession? Officer Tom Briggs, who had come by the bakery twice with questions and the sort of politeness that often hides boredom, stepped forward too. He had watched the clips and smelled the spin. He was not a man who liked theater, but he cared about real evidence. When Daniel approached him and presented the folder, Tom's face changed from bothered to alert. He could not make promises outside the law, but he could assign a plain uniform to watch the square and a detective to be on call. He warned them of the legal lines they must not cross. Anna nodded and promised no vigilante stunts. The law was a thin but necessary shield. Who would you trust more? A friend with fire in his belly, or a cop who keeps the paperwork clean? They rehearsed the sequence once, twice. Who would stand where? Who would keep Jamal's family safe at a cousin's house? Who would signal if something looked staged? They set meeting points and backup routes, marked where the radios would sit, and told Mr. Graham to keep his ledger open for anyone dropping odd notes. Maria volunteered to be the crowd, a quiet presence by the bandstand, and she had a knack for reading a room. The town festival would bring out faces they all knew. Parents with children in sticky hands, teens with painted cheeks, an audience that wanted nothing more than cotton candy and music. A perfect place for someone to strike, and a perfect place for truth to be revealed if you caught the right moments on tape. The clock was not just ticking, it was a shouted promise. As dusk deepened, Daniel felt the edges of his resolve sharpen. He put Lily's crooked drawing back into his wallet, felt the soft paper under his thumb, and imagined what the next day could mean. Either a quiet day of games and pie, or a spectacle that tore what was left of their fragile trust. He told Anna he would not act as judge and executioner. He would be the one to hold the line and only move when they had enough to protect people and press charges. Anna's eyes held a fierce softness. "If we get one chance," she said, "we use proof, not fury." The plan was a net, not a spear. But even as they prepared, a small doubt threaded its way in. Marcus, visible and calm, had not left the town center. He had been at the meeting earlier in the week, speaking of cleaning house. He would be there at the festival, allowed by the same crowd only because he looked like a neighbor doing the hard work. Daniel knew one more thing now. The person who had baited fear would try to control the moment. They would be judged by others. The danger was that the show might be stolen before it even began, that someone could plant evidence and still walk away. They would need more than a camera and a cop. They would need luck, timing, and the courage to stay measured when the world leaned toward noise. Are you ready to stand for truth when the stage is set for lies? They slept little that night. Plans do not erase the smell of betrayal, but they give you a shape to stand in. In the dim hours before dawn, Daniel rode the route once alone, the engine a soft whisper, the town empty and trusting in its own quiet. Tomorrow will not be simple. It would ask them to be smarter, calmer, and faster than the people who had turned fear into a business. The next day's festival would be the line. If they failed, the losses would be loud and lasting. If they succeeded, they might hand back the town its map. The square was full of sun and the smell of frying donuts and the high, bright noise of children. Stalls lined the green, bunting fluttered, and people moved like a river that did not know it could be dammed. Daniel felt the press of the crowd around him as a thing to be held with care. Parents with sticky hands, teens with painted faces, a grandma carrying a pie like a peace offering. Eric, tucked near the bandstand with the recorder hidden under his jacket, sent the smallest of signals. 2 short waves. Maria, eyes peeled, stood by the ticket booth. Anna hovered by the clinic table with Jamal's cousin a polite distance away. Everything was arranged so that the truth could be pulled like a small, precise thread. It started small and grew sharp. A man in a cheap van circled the square twice, nervous and obvious. He stepped out near the food stalls, talking into a phone. Eric edged closer, pretending to laugh at a friend's joke, and the wire picked up a voice Daniel knew from Jamal's description. Flat, directed, patient. The man spoke a name into the phone and a time, like someone scheduling harm the way others schedule deliveries. Daniel felt his pulse rise, but kept his face a practiced calm. They had rehearsed patience. Could patience be the fiercest kind of courage? The man moved toward the bandstand as if to help set up. Maria signaled with a slight nod, and Officer Tom strolled into the path as if making a public check. The van's man froze at the uniform and, in that pause, lifted his head and met Daniel's stare. Somewhere in the crowd a child dropped an ice cream and began to wail. The noise covered everything for a breath. Then the wire caught the man's next sentence, a brief, clipped instruction and a reference to a card and a name. Make them flinch tomorrow, lower the price. Reed takes it. The word landed like a falling brick. Daniel's world narrowed to one syllable, Reed. Councilman Reed, polished, photographed with ribbons. The man who'd spoken at last month's town hall about redevelopment and making room for progress was across the square, shaking hands and smiling for cameras. People trusted him because he smiled for them. People trusted him because the papers printed him as a benefactor. Eric's recorder kept talking, and the wire carried proof the way a bell carries sound. Daniel felt every year of being fooled stack up and then fall apart. When Reed's name dropped from that man's mouth, everything snapped into focus. Staged fear, falling property values. The same councilman's recent oblique comments about tidying up old neighborhoods. Who profits when a whole street gets scared? Daniel moved before he thought he could change his mind. He crossed the green in a single run, the crowd parting like curtains. And when he reached Reed, the councilman's smile flickered but did not fall. Councilman Reed, Daniel said, voice loud enough for the rows of people near the bandstand. Do you know who's been renting vans and sending threats through town? Reed's face hardened into the practiced politeness of a man accused often enough to know how to answer. He stepped back into his handlers and said, "This is a private matter." "Listen." Daniel cut him off and tapped his ear where a small earbud. "Saturday, we have a recording." He pointed toward Eric, who held up the tiny recorder like a talisman. The crowd leaned in. The band ceased. Anna, steady as a surgeon, played the clip Daniel had not wanted to let loose until it was clean and sharp. The man's voice, saying "Reed takes it," echoed through the square, and the murmur that followed was not polite anymore. Reed's handlers shifted uneasily. The councilman's smile slid off like morning fog. Reed's first reaction was denial, then fury, then the thin veneer of a politician trying to look wronged. He spoke of slander, of volatile rumor, of trials. Daniel felt the heat of the moment, and, for a terrifying second, the plan wobbled. But then Jamal, who had been kept quiet at the side, stepped forward with hands that did not shake. He showed the messages on his phone. The van's license plate caught in a grainy shot Anna had pulled from a security camera, and the ledger Mr. Graham had kept. dates and odd payments that tied third parties to a small business front Reed had been publicly associated with through sponsorships. The pile of facts became a small, brutal mountain. Marcus moved then, late, angry, and raw. People had assumed his silence meant guilt. He stood up, and his voice cracked when he spoke. "I work for him," he said, not an excuse, but a confession. "At first I thought it was just pressure. Some men asking for protection money. He promised projects that would help my kids' school. I thought I could control it. I was wrong." The words were heavy and smaller than an explanation needed to be, but the look on his face, tired, ashamed, and strangely relieved, carried an honesty that bore down on Reed's calm. Marcus's betrayal had been real, but it was not the whole shape of the plot. It was a piece that connected to a larger, darker hand. Reed tried to spin the story, political enemies, frame-ups, lies, until the detective officer Tom had on call stepped forward with a warrant. The man from the van, under pressure and now facing more eyes than he had ever imagined, began to talk. He named names and places, and as the story unfolded, it became possible to see the design: manufactured fear to lower prices, threats disguised as random crimes, a handful of men paid to make families flinch and sell out. The final twist landed not like a surprise, but like a sick recognition. The danger had been planned and placed by someone who wore a suit and smiled at cameras. In the hush after the arrest began, the square felt like it had been washed. People clutched hands and looked at each other in a new way, startled, unsure, waking into a neighborhood that had almost been rearranged. Marcus was led away not with triumphant swagger, but with head bent, because his choices had hurt people he'd sworn to keep safe. Daniel watched him go and felt something complex. Rage and sorrow braided together. Betrayal's edges had been sharp, but the final twist had been relief. The true mastermind exposed. What do you do when the traitor is both a victim and a villain? That night, after the last interviews and the crowd slow thinning, Daniel stood under the bakery's dim light and unfolded Lily's crooked drawing. He thought of how fragile the town had been, how easy it had been to bend people into fear. He thought of Jamal's trembling confession and his steady hands, Mr. Graham's ledger, and Marcus's bowed shoulders. The fight had been ugly and costly. The victory was not pure. But the darkest thing, planned, profitable terror, had been stripped of its mask. Outside, children chased a loose ribbon and laughed like the sound could stitch back what had been torn. Daniel smiled, small and raw. He had learned that the bravest act was sometimes the quiet one, holding a town together long enough for truth to find light. What lesson do you take away when the world shows you both cruelty and mercy? If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Your support helps us bring more important stories to light.